Bears are gonna try to eat you. Cold is gonna try to kill you. Bugs are gonna try to carry you off.
For years, viewers of Life Below Zero watched Sue Aikens survive the brutal Alaskan wilderness with nothing but grit, instinct, and a strength that felt almost superhuman. She fought off predators, rebuilt her camp after devastating storms, nursed her own injuries, and lived in conditions that most people wouldn't survive for a single night. But while the world admired her toughness, very few knew the painful truth behind the woman who seemed unbreakable. What really happened to Sue Aikens when the cameras weren't rolling? And why did her life suddenly take such a tragic and unexpected turn? Sue wasn't just surviving the Arctic. She was battling a lifetime of emotional scars and physical injuries that only grew worse over the years. Fans noticed she began slowing down, showing signs of exhaustion that no one had ever seen from her before. Rumors started spreading that she was hiding serious health problems, that she was quietly stepping back from the wilderness, and that producers were keeping certain parts of her story off the air. As her appearances on the show changed, viewers wondered, was Sue Aikens finally reaching her breaking point? Today, shocking new details reveal a side of her life that Life Below Zero never fully showed, one filled with personal battles. Physical decline, secret struggles, and the heartbreaking truth about her future in Alaska. This is what really happened to Sue Aikens. Long before Sue Aikens became a television icon on Life Below Zero, she had already endured more hardship than most people face in a lifetime. Her life in the Alaskan wilderness wasn't just a choice, it was an escape. A way to survive after years of emotional trauma, broken relationships, and a childhood filled with instability. The Arctic gave her the solitude she needed, but it also demanded everything from her in return. And as viewers tuned in season after season, they saw only a fraction of the brutal reality Sue faced when the cameras stopped rolling. Living alone at Kavik River Camp meant Sue had to battle freezing temperatures, unpredictable storms, and relentless predators, grizzly bears being the most dangerous threat of all. One of her most terrifying encounters happened years before her fame. A bear attacked her out of nowhere, leaving her with severe injuries and permanent damage that she still struggles with today. She dragged herself to safety, survived without medical help, and eventually healed the only way she knew how: slowly, painfully, and completely on her own. This single incident shaped much of her future. It affected her mobility, her stamina, and eventually her ability to continue the lifestyle that made her famous. While Life Below Zero showcased her resilience, it never fully captured the toll this life was taking on her body. Years of heavy labor lifting fuel drums, repairing buildings, maintaining snow machines, hauling supplies across frozen ground had worn down her spine, hips, and knees. Fans noticed her posture changing over time. She walked slower, winced more frequently, and often admitted she was in constant pain. But Sue rarely complained. She always pushed through the discomfort because in the Alaskan wilderness, slowing down could mean losing everything, emotionally. The isolation also came with a cost. Although Sue embraced solitude, she was still human. Winters were brutally quiet, sometimes with no visitors for weeks or even months. She lived surrounded by silence broken only by the wind, the distant howls of wolves, and the cracking of ice. For many, that level of isolation would have been unbearable. For Sue, it was both her sanctuary and her struggle. She admitted that loneliness could creep in unexpectedly, especially during dark winters. And even though she had grown used to being alone, the weight of that loneliness grew heavier as she aged. Then came the legal battles, an ordeal most fans never knew the full truth about. Sue accused the Life Below Zero producers of exploiting her injuries, forcing her into dangerous situations and restricting her movement in ways that caused unnecessary harm. She claimed that the show prioritized dramatic footage over her safety, pushing her to travel alone over treacherous terrain despite her worsening physical condition. The lawsuit painted a picture of a woman who felt trapped between her love for the wilderness and the demands of a television production that wasn't always aligned with her well-being. Even though the case was eventually resolved, the emotional strain left its mark. Financial pressures added to her difficulties. Running the Kavik River camp was expensive, especially with the rising costs of fuel, maintenance, and supplies. Harsh weather seasons caused damage that took thousands of dollars to repair. There were times when she questioned whether she could afford to keep the camp going. Yet she always found a way to rebuild, even if it meant pushing her body far beyond what it could realistically handle. By the time the world began noticing changes in Sue's appearance and energy on the show, the truth was already unfolding behind the scenes. She wasn't just aging, she was wearing down. The injuries from her past, the weight of isolation, and the demands of survival were finally catching up with her in ways she could no longer hide. And this was just the beginning of the heartbreaking shift in her story. As the years passed, Sue Aikens' body began sending warnings she could no longer ignore. What once felt like manageable discomfort slowly turned into chronic, debilitating pain. Viewers saw flashes of this on Life Below Zero. Sue moving more slowly, holding her lower back, pausing to catch her breath, or wincing when she lifted even the simplest tools. But what the show revealed was only a shadow of the truth. Behind closed doors, Sue was fighting a physical decline that threatened not just her lifestyle, but her survival. Her injuries, especially from the bear attack years earlier, had caused long-term damage. The reconstructive surgeries she underwent helped her regain function, but they couldn't restore her physically to what she once was. Her spine was deteriorating, degenerative joint issues worsened, and the harsh Arctic conditions made everything more painful. Every winter, the cold stiffened her joints until each step felt like a knife twisting into bone. Even simple tasks, chopping wood, hauling fuel, repairing equipment became monumental challenges, but Sue wasn't someone who admitted weakness. She had built her life, her identity, and her reputation on strength. So instead of slowing down, she forced herself to keep going. She pushed her body through unbearable pain because, in her mind, quitting meant surrendering to a world that had already tried to break her so many times. Survival had become her purpose, and she refused to let her physical limitations define her. However, even Sue knew that something was changing. During her medical visits, because the nearest clinic was hundreds of miles away, doctors told her body was aging faster than it should. The years of strain, the lack of rest, and the extreme temperatures had accelerated wear on her bones and joints. She was facing issues most people her age wouldn't deal with for another decade or more. When she returned home after these appointments, she often sat quietly in her cabin, staring out at the endless snow, wondering how much longer her body could handle the demands of this life. Compounding her physical struggles, Sue began facing emotional pressure she had long ignored. The isolation, once her comfort, became heavier. It wasn't just loneliness, it was the fear of what might happen if she could no longer care for herself. Living in Quebec required constant vigilance. A single slip on ice, a broken bone, or an equipment failure could be fatal. She had always accepted that risk. But now she began questioning whether she could continue taking it. Then came the breaking point, an incident the show only briefly addressed, but one that changed the course of Sue's life. While moving supplies near her cabin, Sue severely aggravated her spine. The pain was so intense she could barely walk. For hours, she lay alone, unable to reach her radio, unable to call for help, and terrified that this might be the moment the wilderness finally claimed her. When she eventually managed to get up and seek help, she realized the truth she had avoided for years. Her body was no longer capable of supporting the lifestyle she had built her world around. Around this time, Sue also faced pressure from the show's production team. The long filming hours, the dangerous travel routes, and the physical demands of performing tasks on camera became increasingly difficult. She worried that continuing under such conditions would worsen her injuries beyond repair. It was during this period that Sue began speaking openly about needing major spinal surgery, something she had put off for far too long. The operation would require months of rehabilitation, during which she wouldn't be able to return to Quebec. For a woman who lived for independence, being temporarily immobile felt like a personal defeat. Yet she knew that if she didn't act, the consequences would be far worse. Fans noticed she appeared less frequently on the show and that she was moving slower when she did. They worried something was wrong, and they were right. Sue's physical decline marked the beginning of a painful transition, one she never imagined she would face. For the first time, she had to consider the possibility that the life she had fought so hard to protect might be slipping away. By the time Sue Aikens' health began to decline, the strain between her and the Life Below Zero production team had already started to surface. What viewers saw on television, a tough, self-reliant woman thriving in the Arctic masked the reality of what was happening behind the scenes. Sue was dealing with growing frustration, mounting emotional stress, and a sense that the show she helped make famous wasn't always concerned with her well-being. And eventually, all of it came crashing down. For years, Sue had quietly voiced concerns about the show's demands. She felt that certain scenes were staged in ways that required her to put herself in unnecessary danger, forcing her to travel alone across icy terrain or perform physically demanding tasks despite her injuries. According to Sue, the producers often pushed for dramatic footage without fully considering the toll it took on her body. The tension grew until she reached a breaking point, one that led to one of the most talked about conflicts in the show's history. Sue ultimately took legal action, claiming that the show had restricted her movement and placed her in hazardous situations that worsened her condition. She argued that she wasn't being given the freedom to manage her own safety and that she was being pressured into situations she believed were unsafe. Though the lawsuit was eventually settled and she agreed to continue filming, the ordeal left deep emotional wounds. It wasn't just about the physical risk, it was about feeling unheard, dismissed, and pushed beyond her limits by people who didn't have to face the same dangers she did. While the legal battle was unfolding, Sue's emotional well-being reached its lowest point. Life in Kavik had always been a double-edged sword, peaceful yet isolating, freeing yet lonely. But after years of chronic pain, ongoing stress, and unresolved conflict, the solitude began to feel heavier than ever before. She admitted that she sometimes questioned her choices, wondering if dedicating her life to the wilderness had come at too steep a price. During one particularly difficult season, Sue opened up to viewers about her emotional struggles. She talked about missing human connection, about the weight of running a camp alone, and about waking up every morning knowing she had to push through pain just to complete basic tasks. But even then, the show didn't capture the full truth. Off camera, there were days when Sue broke down, overwhelmed by the realization that she was aging, hurting, and fighting battles she once felt strong enough to handle. The aftermath of her major spinal surgery only intensified these feelings. The long recovery was one of the most challenging periods of her life. For a woman who prided herself on independence, being unable to walk without assistance was emotionally devastating. She felt disconnected from the world she loved, the icy rivers, the quiet mornings, the wide-open sky, and she feared that her time in Kavik might be slipping away. During this period, Sue also began spending more time away from the camp, filming in different locations or focusing on rehabilitation. Fans noticed she wasn't appearing as regularly on Life Below Zero. Questions flooded social media. Was she quitting the show? Was her health failing? Why did she seem so distant, so tired, so unlike the Sue they knew? The truth was simple yet heartbreaking. Sue was exhausted physically, mentally, and emotionally. Her lawsuit had taken a toll. Her injuries were catching up with her. And perhaps most painful of all, she was forced to confront the reality that she might no longer be able to live the lifestyle she had built her identity around. This internal struggle between the desire to continue her rugged life and the fear that her body would no longer support it was something the cameras rarely captured. But it shaped every decision Sue made during her life. After years of surviving the harshest conditions in Alaska, Sue Aikens finally reached a point where she had to acknowledge the limits of her body. Her spinal surgery, rehabilitation, and slow recovery marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that was less about constant survival and more about reflection, resilience, and redefining what it meant to live fully in the Arctic. The independent woman fans had admired for years was now forced to lean on others, ask for help, and admit that even someone as tough as Sue could face vulnerability. Recovery was far from easy. Months of physical therapy left her exhausted, frustrated, and at times questioning whether she would ever regain the independence that defined her identity. Yet, Sue's resilience remained unbroken. She used this period to rethink her priorities, focusing on sustainable ways to continue her life at Kavik without endangering herself. Adjustments to her daily routine, modified tasks, and careful planning became necessary to balance her love for the wilderness with the reality of aging and injury. Fans who followed the later seasons noticed changes. She moved with more caution, delegated more responsibilities, and occasionally spoke openly about the challenges she faced. But what they didn't see was the emotional courage required to accept help when independence had always been her greatest strength. Sue also began to embrace her role as a mentor and advocate. Her experiences, physical, emotional, and legal, gave her insight into the realities of surviving extreme conditions. And she shared those lessons with younger adventurers, students, and even television crews. Her story became more than just a tale of survival. It evolved into a lesson about resilience, self-awareness, and the importance of understanding one's limits. She wanted viewers to see that strength isn't just measured by endurance, it's measured by the ability to adapt, recover, and continue living fully despite challenges. Emotionally, Sue faced another turning point: reconciliation with the isolation she had once embraced. She began forming deeper connections with close friends, fellow survivalists, and the few trusted visitors to Kavik River Camp. These relationships became vital in supporting her mental health and giving her a renewed sense of purpose. While she still loved the solitude of the Arctic, she now understood that sharing her life, even in small ways, enriched her experience and allowed her to continue her work with more balance. As for her future, Sue Aikens has made it clear that while she may slow down, she will never give up on the wilderness she has called home for decades. She remains committed to preserving the legacy of Kavik River Camp, documenting survival skills and inspiring viewers worldwide. But now she does so with a profound respect for her own limits, understanding that survival isn't just about toughness, it's about listening to your body, valuing your health, and knowing when to ask for help. Sue's journey reminds the world that even the strongest among us face moments of vulnerability. Fame and admiration may have followed her across the Arctic, but the true story lies in the resilience she has shown off camera, the quiet courage to confront injury, isolation and fear, and the determination to continue living life on her own terms. While the brutal Alaskan wilderness will always demand strength, Sue Aikens has shown that strength is more than endurance, it's wisdom, adaptability, and the heart to keep moving forward, no matter the challenges ahead.